So, I wish you all a nice afternoon. To say evening is too early, but thank you very much for coming, in spite of the wonderful weather outside. The IIP is, for many years already, engaged in the whole questions of enlargement, because we are convinced that Europe is not fulfilled if we don't have, especially the Western Balkans, in the meantime also Moldova and Ukraine as member. Of course, we know it's not an easy path to go. It's very, very difficult with many obstacles, and we have to think about how this enlargement can take place. Today in the morning, we had another discussion from the side of the Vienna Institute for International Economics, where we, of course, regard especially the economic situation, the economic obstacles and possibilities. But I think we all agree, especially here in Vienna, that the enlargement issue should be on the table and should be strongly promoted by the European Union, whatever way it is, and it will be a more difficult way, a more staged process probably, but it is an important. Of course, one of the countries is Bosnia-Herzegovina, with whom many of us, of course, especially here on the podium, but also myself, has a special relationship because of the past. I was there the first time on the 1000th day of the occupation, of the siege of Sarajevo, bringing some sort of a gift from the city of Vienna to the city of Sarajevo. And therefore we are very happy if now at least, or at last, there is a recognition of the fact that also Bosnia-Herzegovina should be a candidate with whom negotiations should start. Now, we are especially happy also not only because of the guests here, but because this is a cooperation with the AIES, where I hand over to you, because for welcoming words from your side. I mean, we are a small country, and the different institutes dealing with similar issues, wider issues of security, should work together. And this is one of the examples where we really work together. And of course, those who are not here tonight can view it on our websites. So I think, again, welcome to you here on the podium, welcome to you, and I'm going to hand over to you for your words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Hannes Svoboda, for your introductory remarks and also for welcoming us to the stage, for welcoming also the AIES here tonight to collaborate with the IIP on this very relevant and timely event. My name is Michael ZINKANELL. I'm the director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, the AIES, and it is my really great pleasure to collaborate with the International Institute for Peace for the first time in actually the recent past, I would say. And I do hope that we will also be able to collaborate with you in the future as well on similar events. Certainly European security policy in general, but also the question of European integration, of European accession, is also a question that is very central for our Institute for Security and Defense Policy, for the European Union in general, but also for Austrian foreign affairs in particular. And I'd like to start very briefly by giving you a very, very brief overview of the historic events that outlined the accession expectations for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Historic, I use wisely in this context because we can already look back 21 years when the Western Balkan countries and also Bosnia and Herzegovina were first given the expectation of joining the European Union in the Thessaloniki European Council Summit in 2003, so 21 years ago, which is indeed quite a long time if we consider now that we are at the moment in the year 2024. And of course, the question of optimism is here a very relevant one. Just very briefly, Bosnia and Herzegovina afterwards applied officially for EU membership in February 2016. In October 22, the Commission recommended the Council to basically grant Bosnia and Herzegovina the candidate status, and in December 22, the European Council then indeed granted Bosnia and Herzegovina the status of a candidacy country. And in March 2024, just 2 months ago, the Commission recommended also to open the accession negotiations, which we are now looking forward towards. And of course, this is the question that we will also be discussing tonight, if indeed the European Council will open these negotiations, hopefully this month, or maybe probably over the course of the next couple of months. But this is also one of the questions that we will certainly be addressing today. But just to give you also a little bit more perspective on the relevance for this accession, I mean, the European Union is the biggest trading partner with Bosnia-Herzegovina. Over 70% of its exports and over 57% of its imports are with the European Union, and therefore also from an economic perspective, this is also, of course also of extreme relevance for the region. However, of course, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it a false optimism? Therefore, the question mark at the end of this question is indeed, I would say, accurate, because after this time, after the 21 years, but also after 2016, which also has been already quite a long time, the question is, of course, whether or not this carrot that the European Union has offered the region, but Bosnia and Herzegovina in particular, is still an attractive carrot, or if it's gotten a little bit moldy over the last couple of years. Also now considering that we will have European Union elections, so probably we can also address this question, whether or not a new European Parliament and probably also the rise of right-wing nationalist parties within the European Parliament could change the expectations for accession in the future. However, I will leave it here. I opened probably with a couple of questions. I'll hand over to the moderator, Stephanie FENKART, and thank you very much again for this collaboration. I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion.
Also, another now the third. Thank you also from my side. Thank you for the cooperation with the Austrian Institute for European Security Policy, AIES. It's a pleasure. And my name is Stephanie FENKART. I'm the director of the IIP here, and I'm going to be moderating the discussion, but I'm not going to be the one speaking too much, because I do have excellent panelists here who I'm going to introduce already right now. The first one is Vedran Džihić. The Austrians might know him. He's a senior researcher of the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. Thank you, Vedran, for coming back to the IIP. We have been working together for a couple of years already, dealing on issues regarding the Western Balkans, European Union integration, but not only that. So thank you very much for coming. Next to him, I'm very, very pleased that Milena Mihajlović, she came from Serbia today in the morning. She's the program director of the European Policy Center Belgrade, and I must also happily say an advisory board member of the International Institute for Peace recently. Thank you so much for coming. And last and not least is Dennis Miskić. He is project assistant here at the IIP. He was born in Austria, but his parents are from Bosnia-Herzegovina. And he also has a very interesting, I would say, relationship with Bosnia-Herzegovina. You have been working recently, last year, as far as I remember, at the Srebrenica Memorial Center. So you also know what is going on in the country very well. But you are also representing something which I think is very important, is also the young generation, because we do know it is the region has many, many young people there. Many of them are going abroad because they do think about what is the future of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So now with granting the candidate status, maybe Vedran, I would like to start with you. What does it mean? Why is it important? Either for Bosnia-Herzegovina itself, the region, but also maybe for the European Union. What do we get if we actually can, at one point, have a credible enlargement process? What does it bring to us? What does it bring to the people? What would be your take? And maybe considering that we are all speaking now in a very difficult geopolitical environment, that now we have more, I would say, candidates. We do have, with the traditional ones, the 6 Western Balkan countries. We do have the 3 more from the former Eastern Partnership, Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. And this has to be seen very much in the context of the geopolitical changes, namely the war against Ukraine. And obviously, when we talk about the region, this new impetus giving candidate status, maybe also to Bosnia-Herzegovina, has to be seen in light also with the geopolitical developments, but I hope not only. So what would be your take when it comes to Bosnia-Herzegovina? And you have your own mic.
Thank you so much. Good, no, it's not good evening, it's good afternoon. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for a basket of questions. So basically, we could go on and discuss them one by one, probably for hours. But that's not the point. I just came to IIP from Bratislava, where the Slovak Association for Foreign Policy organized a conference on enlargement, precisely. But people from Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia, and some of us from the Western Balkans. Simonida Kaczarska was discussing North Macedonia. And there were 4 panels all together. And then when we, the Western Balkanese people, occupied the panel, which was not the last, but the third one, the public concluded that we were the most depressive ones. So basically the news from the Western Balkans, as we put it on the panel, were not the best. But let's bring it to Bosnia and to Bosnia and Herzegovina and try to be concrete. As we know that the Balkan starts at Renvig, so Metternich famously used this kind of a notion of Balkan starting somewhere in Vienna, which might be true if we just count all the people from the former Yugoslavia. But anyway, if it starts at Renvig, then traveling towards the east, there is one person in Slovenia, Slavoj Žižek, who usually tells all his stories by referring to movies. And I would like to refer to one movie and try to bring a metaphor for the situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina and to the green light of the EU Commission. So that will be the Groundhog Day. So basically Bosnia and Herzegovina, together with all the Western Balkan countries, departed on this shiny train towards Brussels in 2000, when, if I'm not mistaken, Wolfgang Petric, who is today and tonight with us, and I'm looking forward also, Wolfgang, to your comments and assessment of the situation when you were still running the office of the High Representative. And ever since, it has been a Groundhog Day, in a way. So you wake up anew, you hope, and then it starts, just the situation starts developing according to the same script. So you always wake up in a new situation. And this new situation, like for almost 10 to 15 years, was like nationalism, infights, constitutional crisis, youngsters leaving the country, EU promising, EU pretending that it wants to enlarge, and the Bosnian officials basically also pretending that they want to join the European Union. So this double game of pretending was part of this Groundhog Day. Now, recently, looking at 1 or 2 years back and looking at this spike or rise of secessionist threats and on the return of a rhetoric or narrative of a war, even today. So basically there is when you just open up Bosnian media, you will find much more reporting and coverage on a possibility of a security escalation than on the EU integration. So looking at this kind of change in recent times, I would say this is a new version of a Groundhog Day, where you wake up, the situation is not the same, but it's getting worse even. And now comes Groundhog Day repeats like for 10, 15, 20 times. You just wake up, it's always the same. Now comes March 2024. Due to the fact that Ukraine and Moldova and then also Georgia knocked on the door with a new kind of energy and vigor, and that the enlargement came back as a geopolitical necessity on the table of the European Union following the full-scale, full-fledged Russian aggression against Ukraine. The EU felt bad in a way and felt obliged to give Bosnia the green light, despite the fact that the Bosnian authorities did not deserve it. And that's the new version of the Groundhog Day. You wake up, everything seems to be the same, and this one day you wake up and you suddenly see the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bosnia showing up from Brussels and telling Bosnian population that this is now the big game changer. So now Bosnia is on the EU track. And I mean, the people in Bosnia, they also wake up in this Groundhog Day. They just look at the reality. Reality is the same. Nothing has changed. And then just a few days later, the same Milorad Dodik, who is president of Republika Srpska, who is part of the state coalition on the state level, who basically made some small reform steps possible, and there were some small reform steps in the meantime. He just not out of the sudden, but out of his political logic, basically turned back towards the same secessionist rhetorics. And now in the meantime, so we are now speaking of May, it's few weeks past the green light, the situation has dramatically worsened in the meantime in terms of the rhetoric. The state coalition is de facto not functional. So basically they are almost not functioning at all. And Milorad Dodik took several new steps. I mean, including traveling to Putin, including joining forces with Aleksandar Vučić to fight the planned genocide resolution on Srebrenica. And Milena certainly can say a lot on the narrative in Serbia right now. I think Vučić is going to travel to New York again these days and try to fight this resolution. And that included also legal steps taken by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Republika Srpska to introduce even a separate electoral law for the Republika Srpska, which de facto would mean a kind of a direct attack at the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is where we stand. This is where we stand, basically. And now, I mean, zooming out to the larger horizon of the EU enlargement and looking at the scenes from Georgia today, where the EU flags are waved in front of the parliament, and where there is a certain enthusiasm and urge to fight for European values, and comparing the situation to my home country, and just 2 weeks ago I was in Sarajevo again, I think we have a kind of a major structural problem, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina itself, but in the relationship between the EU and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And parts of these structural problems, and just to name two, and then to finish and to hand over to Dennis and to Milena, I think one part of the structural problem is obviously the state's constitution and state composition, which when Wolfgang was running the Office of High Representative, there was a huge attempt to move Bosnia from Dayton to Brussels by introducing functional elements in the state structure without neglecting the rights, the rights of the constitutive people, as they are called. I think this still stands out there, and there is no proper answer. So there is, I mean, if you have the secessionist threats, it means basically that all constitutional issues are still not resolved. And on the EU side, to name this kind of a main structural question, I'm still not sure that while Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova have become and are new geopolitical necessity, for security reasons, for geopolitical reasons, for economic reasons, why the integration is speeding up. And a colleague from Ukraine today at the panel in Bratislava said EU is still trying to say yes and no even to us in Ukraine at the same time, and we don't buy in. We don't want this yes and no. Tell us yes or no. If you say no, we're going to go the other way, and we will try to do our stuff as we want to. But tell us yes. And in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think the EU still has not said yes or no properly. So there's a formal step, but at the same time, the very one who needs to deliver, and these are Bosnian politicians, so Milorad Dodik, are saying no all the time. So the EU keeps also saying yes and no at the same time to Bosnia and Herzegovina. It hopes that basically some economic packages like this growth package can solve the situation. But basically, after 24 years of the EU accession, the results are very bleak. And to put it in numbers, to conclude, someone just recently on Twitter, or X, as it is called today, calculated or made a kind of projection when the Western Balkans countries could join the European Union based on the speed of the reforms since 2019 and 2021. And Bosnia was unfortunately the worst student in the class. The calculation says that Bosnia, if the tempo, the same speed is kept, will be joining the European Union in 2093, which is in 70, I don't know how many years from now on. So it's a kind of a, I mean, I'm just exaggerating, but it's basically pointing out back to these kind of structural problems that I just outlined. Yeah.
Thank you, Vedran. Milena, Vedran already mentioned the structural problems which are in the relationship between the European Union and Bosnia-Herzegovina specifically. I mean, you personally, you're not really, let's call it an expert on Bosnia-Herzegovina itself, but you are an expert when it comes to European Union accession. And we also heard about the geopolitical environment and everything, but we also do know that the European Union is a lot more than simply a geopolitical association, because there is still also this normative, transformative power, as we might call it, in the hope that, that those countries actually want, maybe not all the leaders, but definitely part of the population, or still a big part of the population, does want to become part of the European Union. Although numbers are dropping, but that might not only be the way that they don't want to be part of the European Union, but just simply because they absolutely lost credibility in that they will actually become members of the European Union due to these very, very long tracks which we already touched upon before. What would be your take on what the European Union should do? Like, what is left of this transformative power? And what could be ways actually to make the European Union again a credible actor in the region, which also then supports also those, I would say, forces which you mentioned. I mean, you mentioned Dodik, his secessionist rhetoric, and you also touched upon Vučić. I mean, all those issues which are very, very, I would say, difficult to grasp when it comes to legislation within European democratic countries. So what would be your take on what can the European Union do, and what would be actually steps to go this way?
Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me here. It's really a pleasure. Yes, the EU's enlargement policy and the EU's image overall in the region is indeed in a deep crisis, and that is, among other things, a result of the procrastination in actually dealing with the necessity for the European Union to enlarge. I don't think that there was ever really a doubt in the EU whether the Western Balkans should become eventually members of the EU. But somehow, until the moment when it became an absolute necessity geopolitically, as you said, the will to really find a way to integrate the region and to be a little bit more creative, perhaps, to learn from the experiences of past enlargements was not there. I think that we are now slowly, and of course when we speak about the European Union, we can never speak about, quick, bold shifts, because we do have 27 member states and a complex network of institutions that need to agree on every single thing. And in the enlargement policy, we know that, as one of the biggest cancers, I would say, of the policy, the fact that unanimity has to be used for every single little decision. So right now, I think that, we do have a realization, on the one hand, of the necessity, of the imperative to integrate the region, and we do see some examples and some signs that the EU has woken up and is starting to use its ingenuity and creativeness to deal with the region. The enlargement policy is an ever-evolving policy. It has learned from so many previous examples and from what has worked and what hasn't worked. I would even dare to say that part of the reason why this enlargement has proven to be so difficult is because the EU has learned a lot from the past enlargements, and especially the big 2004 enlargement and then the 2007 and 2013 continuations of that big wave. So basically, when it came to the Western Balkans, we at that point had the EU, which was far more complex, with a far more diverse power dynamics and structures inside of it, and an EU that has been much less capable of deciding quickly and acting quickly. And this is what we see even now. I mean, we've been speaking about this renewed impetus for enlargement. Well, basically it started already in 2018 when Juncker, who obviously felt bad for, sort of halting and putting a stop on enlargement during his mandate, he published that credible enlargement strategy. Then nobody really believed it. Then in 2020, we had the revised enlargement methodology, which was somehow shoved down the member states' throats by France, which decided to, create a crisis in order to push for some sort of a change in the enlargement approach. But only in 2022, we actually started really talking about how the enlargement can happen. And in the words of a French president, now it is no longer a question of whether, and it is a question of how we will enlarge to the Western Balkans. The point is that now everything that is coming from the EU is seen as too little, too late. And a lot of the actors in the region, including myself, we actually expect quite a lot from the EU in quite a short time, which obviously is difficult to achieve when you need 27 member states to agree, and when still, despite the common consensus that enlargement is a priority now and that it has come so high on the political agenda of the EU and of many member states, that still we face troubles and difficulties taking some decisions and making some definitive changes. For example, just recently, Slovenia and Germany proposed, they submitted a non-paper to the Council in which they proposed for interim steps in the enlargement policy to be taken by qualified majority voting, which would be absolutely possible. There is nothing in the treaties that prevents this kind of a change, but of course, big share of member states are still opposing that, and for various reasons, but some of them for reasons that are, well, let's say not really noble, that are mainly related to their own very specific and very narrow-minded and very short-sighted national interests. So what the EU needs to do now is to try to create and work much more on creating this consensus among the member states. First of all, to advance with the enlargement policy in a way that is going to really reflect this new complexity inside of the EU. With the realization that if every single little step needs to still be taken by unanimity, that the process is bound to take forever. And we don't have that luxury anymore. The fatigue and the disappointment which you spoke about, which you referred to, the disillusionment among the people is really growing and is undermining the very notion of the region joining the EU among its citizens. And of course, I mean, there is an interplay between the political narratives and discourses, which in some countries, especially in my own, but also in Republika Srpska, are extremely anti-European, very problematic, to say the least, but also the population, which is simply disappointed and has lost faith in the process and in the credibility of the EU. So the first thing that the EU needs to do is to try to really harness the present political and geopolitical momentum to try to reach, just like it was, it was quite difficult to reach the consensus of opening accession negotiations with Ukraine, as well as with Bosnia and Herzegovina. Every single change in the enlargement policy will be difficult to achieve, but this investment of political capital into making these decisions is extremely important. The process needs to become more agile and moving towards QMV in at least some phases of the process, interim phases of the process, would be number one. The second thing which the EU should do, in my opinion, is to create a process, to kind of redesign the process in a way that is going to be not only more gradual. The EU is now already working on the basis of this premise of gradual integration. This is the new commonly accepted approach ever since the 2022 European Council conclusions. But the process, in addition to being gradual, it needs to be better structured and it needs to be more predictable. Countries actually need to know what they can expect on the basis of the reforms that they achieve. The new growth plan for the Western Balkans is a step really in the right direction, especially this financial pillar of the new growth plan, the so-called Reform and Growth Facility, in that it makes clear conditionalities for accessing these additional 6 billion euros in grants and loans combined, and 6 billion in just 3.5 years, which is actually a lot of money. If the region manages to absorb that money, that will be a miracle, and it will be a real boost for the region. So this instrument that the EU has opened is the first time that we see a truly performance-based and predictable approach in some element of the enlargement policy, and obviously, financial support based on the reforms in the region is part of that enlargement policy. But at the same time, we see that in the first pillar, for example, of the new growth plan, this gradual access to the common market, there is no structure. There is no clear pathway what the countries need to achieve and how this is going to be structured. So I think that we need much more creativity. We need much more discussion on how to structure the process in a way that it really offers clearly predictable benefits on the road to membership. And this is especially important for countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also Kosovo. I would also say for Ukraine and Moldova, who are, let's say, farther back in the process, and for whom it will take, when you look at the levels of preparedness across different chapters and clusters in the process that the Commission assesses in its reports, you can see basically that Bosnia, Kosovo, Ukraine and Moldova sort of fall into the same category in terms of where they are in terms of preparedness. For these countries that are farther below on this level of preparedness for membership, it is extremely important to have a predictable process, and a process that will be structured, that will offer clear membership benefits, visible and tangible for the citizens, in exchange for reforms. I really believe that this is the only way to keep those countries engaged. I would even now put my own country in that group because despite the fact that Serbia is much better prepared on various technical and sectoral key areas and chapters, in terms of the rule of law, democracy, we have really gone down. So I think that also for Serbia, it will be important to have a structured process that will keep somehow the citizens, the civil societies, all the actors in the societies engaged in the process and really feeling some benefits of this process. If we have to wait for all the benefits to appear once we become members, I don't think that, I mean, this is still too far on our horizon. Vedran was mentioning, what, 2093? I sincerely hope that it's not that far ahead on the horizon, but still, in terms of the political horizons in our countries, which tend to be rather short, or short-sighted, however you prefer to say it, I think that there needs to be a credible possibility to access some benefits and to have something that politicians can really, wave with to their electorate, that they can show off with, just like they showed off with the opening of accession negotiations and candidacy status, even though these things don't bring anything to the citizens. But imagine if you have something that can be similarly impactful as visa liberalization. If you can have something so powerful every 2, 3, 4 years in the process, that could really help buy time until these countries are fully ready to join the EU and the EU is fully ready to join, for them to join.
Thank you so much, Milena. I think you laid out all the difficulties in the process, but I think it's very important that you also said that it should be predictable, but it should also be beneficial for the citizens. So My question to you, Dennis, I mean, you have been born here in Austria, but nevertheless, you know the region very well, and you are more a younger generation still. So my question would be for you, what do you think, like, what is the reason for the young generation why they should aspire or they should push for European Union membership? What are they expecting? What are their hopes? What are their challenges? So what is, from your point of view, the specificality of the young generation, but also maybe if you look at the whole region, because I also know that you comment on newspapers about developments in other countries as well. I mean, we just recently had elections in North Macedonia, and there is a trend shifting there as well. So, and Serbia was mentioned, the democratic backsliding, that media, there is no free media anymore. So from your point of view, how would you assess the situation when it comes to Bosnia-Herzegovina and the relationship with the European Union? Why?
So those are, again, 10 questions packed into one, but
7 minutes.
It's hard for me to talk about the hopes of the young people if you have half of the young people wanting to leave, 25% of them, about 25% of them for a longer period of time. And maybe I remember the time I moved to Srebrenica in September, October 21 was the time where Dodik then for the first time really acted on his secessionist threats. And I don't think I've heard the word EU for months at a time. And the only word you would hear was, or the only thoughts out of people's minds were, okay, do we have to pack our bags and leave, because this time we're not going to stay in the country. This time we're gonna get out in time. And then I remember the queues in front of the German embassy and the people leaving. But then on the other side there were these grassroots NGOs and civil society initiatives that we were cooperating with all the time, that were dealing with these really hard, difficult topics, but where you would have mostly young people sitting in the audience, which to me was something I had never seen before here in Vienna, where this is not really the case. And what I think is that they do still believe in this dream of the European Union, even if we have some polls saying that the most recent ones in March saying that 50% don't believe this is going to have any impact on the future of their country. About a quarter of them don't really see where this is headed. But when you talk to the people, they still do have this vision in their minds, even if it still isn't really tangible. Because for them, this is the promise of economic prosperity, is the promise of peace and stability. And it is the promise, then again, of not having to leave their home country, because this is not, I don't think this is a really easy step to take. And yeah, looking at North Macedonia, I think we will see how this is going to play out. But a lot of people saying, okay, this was to be expected. But then also a lot of young people saying, let's not make this the second North Macedonia and work towards something else. And I think I would leave it here at that. Again, it would be a lot easier to talk about the negative side of the things, but maybe leave it at some kind of positive horizon. And one last comment was, I saw a few days ago the plans for a new skyscraper in the middle of Sarajevo, and the fantastic name of the Europe Tower. And I thought, wow, okay, this is not the most creative name, but a lot of my friends were still okay saying, okay, maybe this is a bit, I don't know, a kind of weird name for a skyscraper. But then again, they're still welcoming the idea, and all these EU flags everywhere when they announce the negotiations. And this is still something that, in my circle, in the younger generation, I would say people are still looking at that positively.
Vedran, I would like to pick up on something you actually said before, which is that most people do actually know that Bosnia-Herzegovina has been granted now candidate status, although let's say that the leaders did not really deliver on the things the European Union actually asked from them. On the other hand, as far as I know, critics would say that Bosnia-Herzegovina has also been treated very, very unfairly within the whole process, because all the time when they actually did deliver on some reforms, the European Union came up with new reforms. And so at one point it was like so many reforms that were needed to do, and obviously this also was not really a boost for the credibility of the European Union. And since you mentioned Dodik, I would have a very specific question, because even though we all know his rhetoric, his secessionist rhetoric, and I absolutely agree with you when you say that if you are in Sarajevo, and I was there last year in I don't know, in fall, I remember, and all the people we talked to, literally you could feel that people have been fearing some kind of, let's call it violent escalation, and they didn't really feel secure, and they didn't really, they really felt, you could grasp in the air that people were thinking about, should I leave right now or should I still keep working for the country? Nevertheless, my question would be now, if Bosnia-Herzegovina would not have been granted the candidate status, I don't think that this would actually, you know, like do anything to Dodik's behavior. I don't think that he would actually change his behavior by doing that. So maybe if you can like pick up a little bit on the positive, transformative side of whatever the process can bring the European Union candidate status. So maybe, although it's not going to be perfect, but is there still, you know, the positive side of it?
I mean, this is this kind of thanks for the question. The old story between optimism and pessimism when it comes to the Western Balkans, and then usually it's said, no, you are a pessimist, you are an optimist, and then no, you are a realist. I just recently came across a wonderful, I mean, painful but interesting article by Tim Judah in the New York Review of Books. He was reporting from Ukraine, from the first line of the front, basically, and then towards the end of this paper, he describes an encounter with a Ukrainian, not soldier, but someone working on the drones and navigating the drones and supplying materials and technical devices for the drones. And then Tim Judah had a kind of a conversation with him about this optimism, pessimism. I mean, how the Ukrainians look into the future now that we have Russians on the offensive towards Kharkiv, etc., etc. And then this guy just replied towards the end, look, and he referred to Auschwitz somehow. So like he said, like in Auschwitz, the first that were killed the first that were killed and died were the pessimists. Then came the optimists, and only ones that had a chance of surviving were the hardworking, creative ones with some kind of a resilience. And when you take this kind of optimism, pessimism, and hard-working metaphor and just bring it down to Bosnia, then and to be factual, basically. First of all, there was not enough of hard work on the side of the government for almost 2 decades, 1.5 decades. So Bosnia simply did not deliver on substantial reforms. Secondly, the effort by the EU in terms of credibility was also probably not the best one. I mean, we do know basically that literally until the beginning of the Russian aggression, enlargement was not a priority, and even more, just to bring in North Macedonia in, enlargement policy to a certain extent was a disaster. I mean, what was done in Macedonia 2017-18 with the promise and with France and Bulgarian blockade, and then today I just read the tweet by Ursula von der Leyen saying basically because the new elected president of, she says Macedonia, but of North Macedonia, yesterday she was swearing in and she was not ready to speak the name of the country according to constitution. So to name the country North Macedonia, she just said, I swear to Macedonia and Macedonian constitution. And then Ursula von der Leyen put a tweet out and said North Macedonia should continue on this kind of delivering on the progress that we saw until today. Basically, there was no progress, and the same goes with Bosnia. So there was no progress. Then comes this kind of a momentum that you just described. But if you lose the credibility on the way, and if you are stuck in this process of faking and pretending on both sides that I described at the beginning, you can't revive the credibility just with a single formal step, having in mind what Milena just said, that basically the beginning of negotiations, or I mean, it's not even beginning of negotiations. I mean, we need a negotiating framework. We still don't know if this is going to come. I mean, for Ukraine, it's the rumors that it's going to be here and at the end of June after the elections. For Bosnia, we still don't know. And just to compare to the region, Serbia started negotiating in 2014, which was 10 years ago, and Macedonia was granted the status of the candidate country in 2005. It was almost 20 years ago. So basically, these kind of formal steps are not able to revise or to revive the credibility. And now comes the point that I think is quite fundamental and crucial. There is an interesting book by Hartmut Rosa, which is he's a sociologist from Germany. He was speaking in this book, published several years ago, about two phases of Europe. One is the emancipatory one, and the other one is the technocratic one. And I think what we see in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina is the technocratic phase. The EU, the Commission was keeping the process, and now it delivered the candidacy status. It was too late and too little, but still it's here, and then you can play around this. But basically, what is lost until today in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the Western Balkans is the emancipatory phase of the European Union. Emancipatory phase of the European Union means basically alluding to certain, I mean, first of all, to the basic European values enshrined in the European treaties, to democracy, and to the notion of freedom, prosperity, to the notion of certain vision that the EU was able to deliver, for example, in 2004, when 10 countries joined the European Union. The EU itself has lost this kind of normative, visionary appeal to the outside, to the neighborhood, and the EU has forgotten basically, or has even, in the case of Serbia, has been compromising on democracy and basic values in the process of enlargement. And this is where Dodik basically comes in. So for the sake of formal progress, you keep making, first of all, wrong decisions probably. You keep partnering with people that are basically, forgive my French, showing you a middle finger all the way around. And by doing so, you obscure the notion of this emancipatory phase of the European Union. Now, I mean, what Dennis just did by referring to grassroots movements and social movements, etc., I don't think that the light of Europe or the vision of Europe, even though Europe today is not living up to it, that it can be just turned off. So it's I mean, Europe as a notion has a kind of a deeper meaning that is going beyond the technocratic institutional issues that we have on the table today. This is why people from the Western Balkans are going to the West. This is why many of the people that stand up against, I don't know, environmental degradation, air pollution, Rio Tinto in Serbia, destruction of the public space, etc., why they basically still live up to this kind of a visionary, emancipatory phase of the European Union. Now, I think forget for a second, forget the Dodiks and the Vučić and all the others. I think what the EU should do is basically try to forge or make alliances with those segments of the Western Balkans societies that still do have this fire of kind of emancipatory, progressive notion of Europe in it. Otherwise, we will just be running circles, be it technocratic circles, be it circles of pretending, be it circles of power games like Vučić does all the time, sitting on all possible tables, etc. And there will be actually a continuation of this, what I just quoted from Bratislava, yes and no at the same time, and yes and no from the Bosnian side at the same time, and yes and no just keeps prolonging basically the very difficult situation that we have right now. Yeah. Yes.
Please.
I would just like, because I fully agree with what Vedran said, and I would just like to add something to that. In fact, I think that the EU has been using this geopolitical argument totally wrong. Instead of using it to, first of all, get and create this kind of a support and consensus among its member states and invest much more political capital to fight the opposition these unilateral, I would not call them bilateral, but unilateral demands coming from Bulgaria, coming from Greece, showing that this kind of behavior cannot be tolerated inside of the EU, especially in this kind of a moment, in a similar way in which they have successfully used this argument with Ukraine. And instead of finding new creative ways to work with those positive actors and pro-European, truly pro-European actors in our societies, in getting them to believe again in the European project, they have been actually, I would even say in a slightly neo-colonialist way, been using the geopolitical argument to actually pursue the EU's very basic, even resource-related interests in the region. So, just 2 years after the biggest massive protests against Rio Tinto and lithium exploration in Serbia, because the whole thing was done completely wrong from day one, in January this year, the Commission signed a letter of intent on the exploration of critical raw materials, read lithium, with the Serbian government. And when these kinds of news come out, this is absolutely devastating for the pro-European sentiment in the country. The French government signed a secret letter of or memorandum of understanding with the Serbian government on cooperation of nuclear energy for civil purposes, which somehow it leaked into the public, includes storage of nuclear waste in Serbia, allegedly. We, of course, don't know because it's secret. Now, we from the civil society have been criticizing the Serbian government for not publishing the memoranda on cooperation and understanding with Chinese public companies and the Chinese government for years now, and have been saying that this is showing why Serbia should not be looking to the east and why it should be looking to the west, where there are some rules about transparency and etc. and then this happens, And why? Well, because it was in the interest of the French government, in a very short-sighted interest of the French government. So if the EU continues to do such things and to treat this region not as future member states, but as countries where you should get some resources, maybe get some cheap labor, pursue basically your basic economic interests, then I don't think that we even stand a chance. And those of us who are working for your European region and speaking about the European Union, we will ever more feel like total fools, naive fools who are losing arguments in our own societies. And on Bosnia and Herzegovina, my feeling is that the EU has constantly been using, this smallest common denominator approach. Like Bosnia and Herzegovina have always been judged according to the worst performing element of the country and of the society. So it's always about, I will just give you an example. So OECD has this program Sigma, which assesses public administration reforms in the region. Until recently, Bosnia and Herzegovina was constantly so poorly performing compared to all the rest of the region because the final grade, the final assessment in each of the areas was always based on the worst performing element in public administration reform. So you take human resource management and civil service. Well, if in the Republika Srpska or somewhere something is not functioning, this is the grade that Bosnia gets. If in policy development and coordination, again, one element of the country is not performing well, this is the grade that Bosnia has. And Bosnia has always had the worst grades. We, from the civil society, started some years ago our own project to assess the public administration reforms in the region. And in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we decided to focus on the federal, on the state government. Imagine, Bosnia and Herzegovina turned out to be one of the best performing countries in the region with a lot of very, very positive practices. So why isn't the EU capable of, not treating Bosnia as the, bad child that is always to be punished, But, you know, to use like positive stimulation, you know, as parents, we always speak like you should not be working with your child based on constantly punishing it, but to actually recognize what the potential and what the good behavior is and to stimulate that.
Sometimes we punish them.
Sometimes, yeah, but, you know, in general, positive stimulation, recognizing the positive elements, recognizing what works and working with that. Working on the basis of that, the EU is not going to lose anything if it, you know, opens a chapter or opens accession negotiations or does something positive without the Bosnia fully deserving it. But it can actually promote and show that when things work, the rewards come. But of course, as we spoke, you know, about North Macedonia, and there are other cases in the region where simply the EU again and again and again makes the same mistakes. If this kind of a vicious circle doesn't stop, I don't think that we can hope for any positive outcomes, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is, as we always say in every event on Bosnia and Herzegovina, such a complex country, and you know the most difficult problem that the EU has to deal with in the region.
Maybe if I can just cut in, but maybe it's also about the communication, because I mean maybe for people like us it's important what these kinds of reports assess, but I doubt that the average Joe, the average man or woman somewhere in Foča, where my mom is from, really cares about, you know, what this specific report or that specific, I don't know, politician tweeted on X. So maybe then it is also about how to communicate these kind of processes with the people in the country. And the problem is also that the distrust of political institutions, of the media. I mean, I see it every time I go to Bosnia and Herzegovina for a story and I ask people on the street for comments. They are very careful with who they give interviews to, who they give quotes to, because they just have this basic distrust in political institutions, media institutions, I don't know what else. And the biggest trust goes to religious institutions. And then this is another box that I don't want to open now. But yeah, maybe it is also a way of thinking about how to communicate it, you know.
Thank you. I think it was very interesting also what all of you said, that but we still need also to look at the progressive forces and how actually we can support them, how the European Union also can support them. Obviously not only within civil society, but you also have like some specific figures, maybe even dealing with politics and also there, and how we actually can help, I don't know, to promote them and to give them more leverage and or maybe even more visibility also within their country, so that they are, I guess, I don't know, last time when I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina and we went to Lajce, so Jajce, not only to Sarajevo. I mean, those people, not all of them do actually speak perfectly English as all of you do, obviously, so they also need to get their information from their own societies and from people actually they have trust into. I think, thank you so much. I would leave it from here because we still have questions for the audience, but I think it was super interesting and you touched upon many issues, not all of them. We didn't solve all of them yet, but please raise your hand for questions and don't be afraid. They're going to be nice to you, I guess. We have the first one here, and then the lady there, and then there.
I want to speak first because I want to take up the point you mentioned and took up the point from Vedran and Milena. First of all, we have to recognize that the enlargement issue with the countries of the Western Balkans is very different from the other rounds of enlargement. Of course, we had difficulties also with Bulgaria and Romania. That's the reason why we postponed it. With difficulties with Croatia. But in all these countries, more or less, there was a common willingness to go towards the European Union and to overcome all the internal splits. If you go to the countries of the Western Balkans, unfortunately, and I have great sympathy for all the countries, you don't have that situation. And the EU has a totally different situation in confronting the countries of the Western Balkans, because there is no really, even in Albania, you have this permanent fight between the Democrats and the Socialists, and they are not agreeing on common policies towards the European Union. First point. Second, I fully agree with what Vedran said and Milena, what you said, and I think Dennis will be the same on the same issue, to go for the civil society or for all those who want to promote the way towards the West, towards the European Union. But you always speak about the EU. Who is the EU? Is it Mr. Orban? Is it Kaczynski? Is it Meloni? And I think what we tried in a small way, Stephanie knows very well, and also Vedran and Dennis, and you also, to combine the progressive forces in the region with the progressive forces in the European Union did not work until now, even in a small way now. So my question would be how to combine, how to connect progressive forces, and progressive I mean pro-European forces inside the European Union and in the region. Otherwise, the EU is even the backlash we have in countries of the Western Balkans, but also in the EU, with a small exception of Poland or the last government. So I think this is the vital issue, is how to bring together progressive forces in the European continent, which unfortunately is not happening. Putin is much more successful in organizing the nationalistic forces than we are on the progressive side.
Was the lady there in white?
I would like to ask a question regarding the youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because I'm an individual who myself come from Bosnia, and I've spent 18 years in Bosnia. And you have said that you presented the youth in Bosnia and Herzegovina more like apolitical. Can I just know why, and on which terms did you manage to get this opinion, and in which circles have you been journaling and collecting these informations? Because in my opinion, European Union has doing its propaganda, but not in a negative way, in a positive way, especially in youth, and not with the older generations. And the only projects and the only improvements I have seen, from my opinion, are related to youth, are related to our educational system and to our NGOs. So I wanted to ask you that question, and yes, that's from my side.
Thank you. First row here. He was first. We can do a second round. I'm happy about a second round.
Yes, so I have some questions from Austrian point of view. And of course, Austria is, since 20 or more than 20 years, one of the strongest protagonists of Western Balkan EU enlargement, and try to uphold its interest through cooperating or making a coalition with another EU member states, but especially Central and Eastern European countries in 2000 years in the framework of a regional partnership, and then since several years, the Slavko format on the one hand, and also Central 5 on the other hand. But my honest interest is such a coalition have not enough political weight in the decision-making process of the European Union. And my question is, why Austria and its Central European partners, why do they have not enough influence on the decision-making process? And the second question is, how can Austria, or protagonist country of West Balkan EU membership, get a political weight in the decision-making process? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we can start already with the answering of a first round, and then we can do a quick second round. Who would like to start? I have 3 questions. One was how to connect the progressive forces from the region with the forces here. Please.
If you don't mind. It's of course a tough question, and I agree with you. I mean, this kind of an analysis, it sometimes appears as not sufficiently nuanced when I myself even realized that maybe it sounded like, we are kind of blaming all on the EU, whereas this was absolutely not the intention. It is clear that that we cannot and should not and must not look at the EU as a monolithic structure, and I mentioned, that I'm absolutely aware of this complexity, and definitely the connections between progressive forces. Yes, this is something that needs to be done. I think that there is lots of EU programs through which this is already being done. Inclusion of the Western Balkan countries into the Horizon Europe program, into Erasmus Plus program, into the Citizens Equality, Rights and Values program. These are all programs which allow these kind of, citizen-to-citizen connections to be created and to be built. Although I have to say that in the implementation of this excellent idea, we face a lot of difficulties. I mean, just an example, we applied for a this EU program, which is supporting civil societies. We applied for a project, we got the project, we had partners from Ukraine, North Macedonia, all around the region, and then it turned out that the governments of most of these countries have not signed or have not formally acceded to the program. In most cases, because they weigh the cost of joining this program with what the benefits will be, and of course, if the government doesn't join the program, we in the civil society cannot participate in the program. And now we have to replace almost all of the partners, including the Ukrainian partners, including the Macedonian partners, etc., etc. So these are the kind of stupid and difficult mistakes which are done in the very process, and this is what the EU needs to rethink in order to make sure that these kind of citizen-to-citizen connections and opportunities for cooperation do not suffer because the governments are lazy, are unwilling, don't know how to manage their budgets, and whatever the reasons might be. But when I think about supporting these pro-European societal actors, I don't mean just that. I mean by actually formally supporting them in the EU accession negotiations process. We wrote a policy paper back in 2018 where we argued that the process of accession negotiations suffers from a huge executive bias. The EU basically assumes that the governments, the executives in the region are fully have full legitimacy. We are completely functional democracies in which once the governments are elected, they have the full mandate to participate and to lead the process and to be their main interlocutor in the EU accession negotiations or any other aspect of the process, which is actually not entirely correct. So we argued that the EU accession process formally should see a much stronger role for civil societies and parliaments. And that in the parliaments, because again, even in the parliaments, we have the process that in some countries, the parliaments are basically rubber stamping machines for the executives, that in the parliaments there has to be a focus on each and every segment of the political spectrum. We do have the Stabilization and Association parliamentary committees, which meet twice a year and they discuss blah, 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 and that's it. It remains a blah, blah, blah story, maybe, a news somewhere, probably not even a piece of news. We need actually to embed a much stronger focus on the civil society and the parliaments in the accession negotiations process, because the very premise on which the decision to work only with the executive is false. And not only because of that, but also because of the fact that the transformation process of a country into a future EU member state is really much, much, much larger and much wider than the internal governmental reforms. So without actually finding a way to include the societies, to include all societal actors in a legitimate and true way into this process, I don't think that we can speak about transformation of the entire society and entire country into a future member state.
Vedran, would you like to add on that one or take up the Austrian question and the cooperation with the Central European partners and their influence? Please take the mic for the recording.
Okay, yes. No, thanks, Hannes, for first of all reminding us that we're asking the question, who is the EU? Of course, I mean, if we just look at one of the closest partners of Dodik and Alexander Vučić, who sits in Budapest and who is hosting the previous prime minister of North Macedonia, or Macedonia back then, Nikola Gruevski, as probably the single one and the only asylum seeker that got asylum in Hungary in the last decade, then you basically have this question on the agenda. And I think this question is going to be even more important after the elections in June. Yesterday I took my kids to excursion in the Lower Austria, and then wherever you come to a small village, you see the slogans of the Austrian Freedom Party speaking about the EU craziness and portraying Zelensky and Ursula von der Leyen, etc., etc. So we will have this kind of a rise of far right, which then makes the question even more important. Who is going to push for this geopolitical necessity? What coalition can we have? And how urgent it is to push for the majority voting when it comes to the steps towards the geopolitical necessity. And geopolitical necessity is not just a phrase. I think really that the fate of Europe is now bound to the fate of Ukraine. So if Europe fails in Ukraine, we could even imagine of a European Union falling apart to a certain extent. So I think this is really important. I just wanted to add this one, but about transnational political progressive forces, I think a lot of efforts have been ongoing. I mean, you have all possible types of exchanges, and on the left side and on the activist side. I participated myself in several of these kind of a fora where the people come together. But then the question about the progressive forces which are creating a kind of a real utopia, bottom up basically, is always basically how are they met with realpolitik on the other side. And someone, I mean, we were speaking about the political will. You mentioned the political will, which is needed for the enlargement. And I think there is a huge gap between realpolitik in the region right now and the potential of these kind of progressive forces that are active, that are out there, but that are just right now a kind of a resource for some kind of a potential change of the whole approach in the future. And when it comes to realpolitik, unfortunately, the EU has not been doing well in general with those kind of fake democrats, or name them autocrats, name them despots, but name them chameleons in a way. And just looked up at the social platform Twitter, X. And just picked up like Vučić's last steps in the last few days. Basically, it's like Vulin in the government, who is on the U.S. list of sanctions, blaming the West for everything that is worst, including Germany and Andrea Schieder, a friend and a social democrat. Then 8th of May, Xi Jinping coming to Serbia, signing a future agreement, including probably much bigger investments of China in the years to come, which 26 agreements in total, which the growth plan of the EU cannot match. I think this also has to be put on the table. Then 9th of May, celebrating the Europe's Day with EU ambassadors, singing the anthem even. Then the 13th of May, the First Lady Zelenska and the Foreign Minister today visiting Belgrade, and tomorrow he's going to have a longer meeting with the Russian ambassador in the morning. So, I mean, more of a chameleon you can't have, and this is realpolitik, because this is where, I mean, you need to put it together. Regarding Austria, Hannes and Wolfgang, you were, I mean, quite vocal about the empty place called engaged Austrian foreign policy in this country, foreign policy debate, actually. And when it comes to the Austrian foreign policy to the Balkans, everything is fine. Honest broker, supporting EU enlargement, even developing certain plans. I mean, Milena, I think you were involved in this kind of a staged accession, etc., etc. Everything is perfectly fine, but in the substance, it's not really. So, I mean, the department for the Western Balkans is small, and colleagues here were running the department previously in the public. The resources are not there. The Austrian foreign policy lacks a focus, actually, or the Austrian foreign policy at the current with the current government, and I think the EU enlargement is a kind of a reflex of you just go for it because we used to go for it, but in an essence it's a lot of focus on the economic policies. I think that's
and Austria's interests in the region.
I mean, it's of course. I mean, economic policies. That's important. That's important for the Austrian GDP and for the Austrian growth. That's fine. I mean, that's a legitimate kind of a goal to go. You have there are security interests, obviously, with the military presence in Bosnia and then in Kosovo. That's also quite clear. But there is at the same time, at least with the recent governments, an interest to stop migration and to close the Western Balkans routes. And Kurz famously closed the Western Balkans route, which was never closed. So I think there is a if we speak about the weight, someone mentioned the weight of Austria in the Western Balkans. I would say that continuously, step by step, the Austrian foreign policy has been losing weight in the European orchestra, and now with enlargement becoming a geopolitical necessity. Of course, it's France and Germany and the big ones running the business, and basically then Austria just can chip in. And I think there is much more. There will be much more space for the Austrian, for active Austrian foreign policy in the Western Balkans. Yeah.
But if I can just add here, but I think that at the same time it should be stated that it is thanks to countries like Austria that, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina got the opening of accession negotiations, because I know from discussions with Austrian colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that whenever other countries were pushing for Ukraine, Austria was pushing for the Balkans not to be forgotten and not to be skipped, etc. So in that sense, I think that we can be grateful.
Dennis, the question on the youth.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I don't know if it's possible to say if the youth is apolitical, if the youth or the whole civil society sector, especially the youth in the whole Western Balkans, is anything but apolitical. If you look at the protests against the hydropower plants in Bosnia, if you look at protests against the hydropower plants in Albania, protests in Northern Macedonia related to environmental issues, there were huge protests led by young people, Serbia as well. If you can visit a public book discussion at the Faculty of Political Science in Sarajevo on a topic like intercepted phone calls right before the war from 91 to 92. So this is not really a discussion where you would expect a lot of people, right? And you could enter the room and it will be, so every chair is filled, and then you have a few people in the back and then more people standing up here, and like 50 people in the live stream, and it's all young people interested, asking questions. So there are so many, you mentioned it, like international projects, of course, focused on the youth. And I think also now that the government in the federation entity has realized how big of a potential the youth has, and they've published now their strategy for the youth 2024 to 2027, where they also, amongst other things, they want to focus on the diaspora. But I mean, look at the summer schools you have all the time, these initiatives, whether it is the Radio U Active in Zenica or civil society initiatives in Tuzla, in Sarajevo, summer schools. Also, Vedran knows when he organizes the summer schools in the region, how many young people go there. So no, it's anything but an apolitical young people in Bosnia. But what the feeling that I get is, every few weekends that I visit my family in Bihać, for example, a few more of my childhood friends have left for Germany, Croatia, Australia, whatever, Switzerland, because they say that they're tired, they are exhausted really of this political climate. And a lot of people now in my generation are saying, this is not an environment where if you think about raising your kids, if you think about starting a family, and so this is the decisions that they are waging. This is what I wanted to say. But looking at all the stuff that is going on in Sarajevo, you can't believe how many young people go there.
Can you just add something to this? Because the colleague who asked the question mentioned that the EU has this positive propaganda in the region. And my feeling is that young people generally don't respond well to propaganda, any sort of propaganda, positive or negative. I think that they respond well to authenticity, to something that they see and feel is real. And so whenever the EU acts in a hypocritical manner, it will lose the young people of the region. You know, if the EU decides to work with the Serbian government on exploring lithium, even though majority of young people in Serbia are against this project, and even though everybody knows that it was done completely wrong, so I mean, sorry, but some things cannot just be fixed after they were broken. Rio Tinto and the Serbian government did something completely wrong. They did this project in secrecy. They didn't do environmental impact assessments. They didn't communicate to the public. And when the EU then signs the cooperation agreement with the Serbian government to work on lithium and says, well, we still need our lithium, you know, sorry, you might not like it, but we still need to get our lithium somewhere. And, you know, because of the nearshoring, we need to get it from Serbia. And when those interests prevail, this is how you lose young people. So I'm afraid that if the EU continues to work in this manner and to continues with this kind of an approach, I don't think that the Western Balkans is going to be, you know, future member states of the EU. I think that we are going to be just, you know, source of lithium or source of cheap labor and etc. Place to go to vacation, maybe. That's it.
We had a question in the back and one in the front. And another one over there.
Hello, I'm actually accidentally here because I'm at the master's at WU Vienna and I'm living in Bosnia all my life for 30 years. And when we are talking about these political progressive actors and civil society members, it is important to say that currently, in comparison to 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you don't even have 20% of the manpower. Like people of my generation, most of them left or are planning to leave or are currently working for international organizations, which is again a huge debate back in Bosnia because all of my peers that were in local organizations, they couldn't afford actually working more for organization and then they got assigned by these international organizations and now they're just building up CV to leave Bosnia. So we are now talking about building up a civil society in Bosnia, but in what's happening on the field the last 5 years is that international organization, especially after the migrant crisis, IOM, took over 100 probably most capable activists in Bosnia and Herzegovina and took them from small organizations. And one other thing about the active young people, the sad thing is that those who are 18, 19, 20 years old, when I was an activist, not all, but over 80% of them are not living in Bosnia anymore. So when you mentioned that active young people are attending these seminars, yes, they're attending and then they get tired, as Milena said, and they just leave, and that's a huge problem. So I think if we continue these slow steps, like in my generation was joking when we saw that there's a hope for Bosnia with this negotiation, because I've been hearing it since I was a small child when Wolfgang Petric was the High Representative. That's when it started. And then you start hearing it now. We are literally just joked about it. Nobody believed it. So I think there is much less time than we actually think because I'm already on the road for 1 month. When I was leaving, one of my friends said, yeah, you are leaving now, the troubles will begin. And those people who stayed in Bosnia, they already bought guns. If they bought apartment, they bought gun. So that's how the situation there. And also one young person on the other project a few days ago asked me, like, is it real that our borders are closed? So if I go back to Bosnia, I cannot leave anymore. So I was super afraid to leave. So that's the current situation. So more of a question is like, how can we, I don't know, we are talking about these young people and these progressive actors, but there are not many of them. And actually we don't have much time to engage them because they are dissatisfied and mostly leaving, like Milena said, when they see these actions like Rio Tinto, and we see these actions on a daily basis also in Bosnia when the European Union, or international community, I won't say European Union, is saying one thing and doing another thing on the field that makes you really tired and then you just want to give up. Yeah.
Thank you. Gentleman there and then Michael in the first.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and I also come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Spent there 19 years of my life. And I don't think that the youth is apolitical. I think it's lethargic. I think it's pessimistic. I think that we have a problem of transgenerational and collective trauma, which is family trauma inherited. I think it's the youth sees itself, in general, the population in the country and in the region tend to perceive themselves as victims, and victimhood is always linked to some form of loss, whether a family member, loss of normal standards. This brings forth always the idea of aggressors and of saviors, and I think this is one of the problems that we currently see, where you have politicians exploiting this kind of situation in the country, presenting themselves as saviors, or foreign leaders coming in as in form of Xi Jinping or Putin, who on the Serb side, and I can attest to that as I'm also Serb, will have majority of them will see them as saviors, which is problematic in itself, and the other side will see as aggressors. And when you speak with other members of other nationalities in the country, they have opposite views. They see maybe Xi Jinping and Putin as aggressors, the Serbs as aggressors, where others as saviors. So this is a very contrasting pictures all in one country, and which cannot coexist with each other. And my question was, how can the EU and what can the EU do to address this transgenerational and collective trauma, especially in the youth population? I've also heard a lot of things being said about civil societies in cities in the federation. I haven't heard any mention of any civil society from Banja Luka or from Republika Srpska. I was interested to know whether there are any initiatives happening on a state level between civil societies in the Republika Srpska and the Federation. I think this is a very important topic to be discussed, and a very big challenge, because a lot of those projects, and I've taken part in some of the projects in Tuzla, there are not many Serbs from Republika Srpska, and if you don't have a cohesive society working together to resolve the issues and actually have a dialogue, you have problems. I think this stems also from the fact that if you learn history in schools, you have pretty much 3 different versions of history, and these versions of and perspectives on reality cannot coexist with each other. And you know, everything that I hear is just discussions happening in civil societies in the Federation and not in Republika Srpska, or not interstate, not on the state level. How can this be addressed? How can this be resolved? What can the EU do, and what can other civil societies in Serbia and Austria do as well to address this issue? And you've mentioned briefly the role of China. I think it poses difficult questions also for the EU. What is something that the EU can offer to the youth and to the whole societies on the Western Balkans, which the Chinese can't, to actually attract them? Because when I look officially the statements, I think there is a consensus of all political parties in the country concerning EU integration. Everyone is on the same page, officially. Unofficially, there comes certain talks about partnerships, about potential for BRICS and for other organizations, and this is a very serious topic, with very serious questions that we need to answer if we wish to progress as a country and as a region. The youth always, I mean, when you think of, when we look from the youth perspective, youth has lost majority of its trust in not only in local politics and local politicians, because corruption is seen everywhere. They see also and hear topics about corruption in the EU. They see migration problems. They see a majority of people from Nepal coming to Croatia, asking themselves, do we want this really in our country? They see young people leaving Bulgaria, saying, do we want this really? How has Bulgaria profited from EU membership and integration? So how can the EU again sell this idea and this picture of European society as a whole to the young generations in the country. And this is a very funny trend. You have young population wanting to leave countries in the region, wanting to emigrate to EU countries, and then still bashing EU and saying EU is not the road that we should take, EU is not the future. What can be done to effectively change this picture? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent comments, very easy questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, first of all, for your excellent input. I have two concrete questions, probably also following up a little bit on the questions and the excellent questions that were mentioned before. One, Milena, for you, because you mentioned previously these probably positive examples or positive drivers of powerful incentives for citizens, and you mentioned, for instance, the powerful message that the visa liberations had, and that you would like to see more of these positive examples of a structural approach. Can you give probably other examples that would have an equally powerful impact, an equally positive impact, especially for the civil society, such as the visa issue? And secondly, Vedran, for you, China has been mentioned, Russia has been mentioned briefly as well. I would just like to get your assessment. How would you see the role of external actors, especially Russia and China, in terms of what influence do they have already in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also probably in the wider region? Did they take over some sort of vacuum that the European Union has left, especially in the hearts and the minds of the people, but also in the politicians and in the economic situation, of course, as well? Do you see that these external actors, Russia and China in particular, have already taken over these parts, and how would you assess basically their role and their influence in the region? Potentially also, of course, raising the question how negatively they can impact further paths towards accession in the region. Thank you.
All right, who wants to start with the easy questions?
Maybe just a few words, because I don't know how much time we have on
not too much
to touch upon.
But just to say, we still have some water and wine afterwards, so we can then maybe still elaborate on some of the questions, because there have been so many, and I think all of them were super important. But please.
But on this building up your CV to leave, a few weeks ago, or I think a few weeks ago, there was a group here, like from all of the 6 Western Balkan countries, and a few people from the diaspora, and I heard a very interesting thing from a young man from Albania, and he studied abroad for a few years, and he said he deliberately went abroad not with the intention of leaving Albania, but he said he wants to go somewhere, and specifically with the intention of, educating himself there and come back to Albania with that knowledge that he received. So maybe then, in thinking what incentives, if we think about incentives, what incentives can you give to young people to, still leave this option open of coming back? The topic on traumatized and how to approach this. I mean, of course, we have all these projects from, for example, if we talk about collective and generational trauma, the Post-Conflict Research Center in Sarajevo, that includes everyone and anywhere in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I'll give you an example, which is not an NGO. It is very much a state institution, but not really financed by the government. It's still financed by foreign investments and projects. But the Srebrenica Memorial Center, where I worked, that does the same thing. You go to any school you're allowed to go in the Republika Srpska entity. Projects you include anyone from the whole country, and you don't separate from the entity. And my approach to this, being pessimistic about these topics and this trauma in the society is dealing with the past. This is a process that is hurtful, and this is a process that takes a lot of time. But the steps that are being taken in the past few years which is coming out of the Srebrenica Memorial Center, and where I find it very interesting that, here in Vienna or in Berlin, you hear very little about this institution, because the work that they are doing, I think, is very is disturbing a lot of people, because it is, going into the core of really what it is dealing with the past. And you see this with the Srebrenica resolution, which is now this week going to be voted on by the General Assembly after the discussion of the Security Council, where people are telling me, this is a bad thing because it's causing trouble in the region because of Vučić and Dodik. So we're supposed to wait until it's fine for Vučić and Dodik for this resolution to be passed, for these topics to be dealt with, and then we'll do it. No, this is not the way that it should go, and also a lot of education, and I have the state level cooperation. Well, I think maybe I hope I kind of tried to give you an answer, but really it is a lot of education, and I would really encourage, on these topics to really look at what the Memorial Center is doing. And I'm not saying this because I spent 1.5 years there. I'm saying this because it really is an incredible institution that is approaching these topics with a lot of caution, but I think in the right way.
On the question of on how the EU can support breaking this intergenerational trauma, I really don't know what to say. I mean, really, it's a very difficult question. I would just argue that, by being more genuine and by trying to, focus more on the values side of the whole process than these, strategic and specific economic interests, that this is something that can motivate and mobilize young people. And even in cases where young people do leave these countries, this does not necessarily have to be the end of their relationship with their country, and it usually isn't. So the EU could perhaps invest much more in creating programs that can, focus on creating and building these linkages. And this goes back to the comment that the colleague from Bosnia made on, how actually this hypocrisy of the international organizations, including the EU delegations, for example, how it works. Because rather than actually supporting and working with civil societies to build their capacities and help them retain people in the sector, when they need people, they just simply take our people. And I mean, I absolutely second what you said. We are facing the same problems. The EU delegation took recently one of my best people, and when we tried to argue that this should not be the way, that maybe they should help us be able to match the salaries that they give, they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, this is how it works. My young researchers even were leaving because the EU delegation was offering internships that were better paid. So I had young researchers, who had, starting salaries of 500, 600, 700 euros, and the delegation gives them 1,500 euros per month to a person who has 1 year of experience. Well, and when we tried to speak about this with them and to say, okay, maybe we can offer you our people who are our researchers to come and as interns to work at the delegation once a week, and you help us with paying the salaries, they told us, well, we're sorry, this is a policy from Brussels. There is nothing we can do about it. And other international organizations are, even worse. So I fully agree with this. I think that, this is the kind of hypocrisy that is not making things easier at all. You asked about other examples, and of course, it is difficult to really match the example of visa liberalization policy. This is something that was extremely visible. But, still, even though we have biometric passports and we don't need visas for the EU countries anymore, still, when I arrive at the Austrian airport or the Brussels airport, I have to queue in the all passports or alle passe lane together with, Americans, Chinese, Japanese, now Brits as well, etc., etc. So, you know, these kinds of symbolic things could also go a long way in showing that, you know, EU candidate countries who actually, you know, technically fit the criteria could perhaps be moved to the European passports. And I always get offended when the airport employees ask me, do you have a European passport? And then I have to say, I don't have an EU passport, but I do have a European passport. And I feel like a, you know, like an idiot always arguing with them about this. Yeah, exactly. The other thing, you know, I mean, and beyond these symbolical things, I think that, you know, full participation of the Western Balkans in EU programs free of charge. If the EU is supporting us financially to develop and to close the socioeconomic convergence gap, one of the steps can be to waive the costs of participation in EU programs, because simply, I for example, know that the reason why the Montenegrin government, I don't know if they have joined in the meantime, but why the Montenegrin government didn't participate in either Horizon Europe or Erasmus Plus was because they simply, the participation fee was too high compared to the perceived benefit that they could have. And, you know, when we participate in Horizon Europe programs, we never coordinate, we never lead. The competitiveness of these programs is so high that the best European EU institutions, you know, hardly compete to get those programs. So we can only hope, you know, to be a small partner. And now, after 13 years of our existence, we finally managed to become partners, you know, minor partners in one Horizon Europe program. So these kinds of difficulties, I think that the EU institutions need to be much more aware that they need to stimulate our participation in these programs, and they should not let stupid things such as participation fees or government decisions to block our entry into these programs. And these should be much on a much bigger scale. Also, this is maybe not so visible immediately to the citizens, but part of our proposal on reforming the enlargement policy according to the so-called staged accession model was that the EU should extend to the candidate countries not only much higher financial assistance, which the EU has now actually endorsed through this new growth plan, and this is, as I said, you know, really a step in the right direction, but that the EU should also look for ways to integrate and involve representatives of our governments and our administrations in the work of EU institutions, so that we actually start to participate in the EU debates, in the EU discussions. When we had the conference on the future of Europe, the Western Balkans were not involved. I mean, the process, yes, was opened indirectly to the citizens and civil societies. We could organize a few events here and there. But unlike the Central Eastern European countries that were included in the convention back in the early 2000s, we were not, I mean, the region was not even formally included in the conference on the future of Europe. So these are the kinds of tactical mistakes that EU keeps making, which actually prevent our region and people in our region from really believing in this EU future, not to say European future, because yeah, I would undermine my own argument. Sorry, your mic, I don't know why.
Milena, just if this makes you, I mean, being a kind of more relaxed when you enter the border checkings at the Austrian border. So they used, just 2 weeks ago when I came in, they asked me how long I am going to stay and what I want to do in Europe. And then I just responded that I've been living here for 30 years, but still don't have the Austrian citizenship due to the restrictive Austrian citizenship laws. But this is another story. Now, anyway, I mean, I mentioned the Groundhog Day, and I think there is something about these kind of a Western Balkans and Bosnia discussions similar to a Groundhog Day. So we have been repeating a lot of those issues and topics for a while, basically. And sometimes I just do the exercise, go back to my book on Bosnia published in 2009, and I just sometimes have the feeling that I'm reading basically a book of focusing on the situation into 2024, so like reconciliation and ethnopolitics and all this stuff. But anyway, I think we could just stop discussing any possible issue if we will just end up in this kind of overall depression. Basically, I think there is a need to think about alternatives. I mean, this is what is specific for the humankind. So we need alternatives. And just responding to some of your questions, first of all, a good news regarding China and Russia. I mean, also to be positive, is that the Western Balkans are not going to join China or Russia anytime soon. And the other part of this good news is basically, despite all the difficulties and political stalemate that we have in some parts of the region, this is a small region that is to a certain extent already integrated into so many structures of the European Union. Just walk the streets of Vienna and see all the young people like you, but also in terms of energy, in terms of I mean, we have NATO members, we have dual citizenships. I mean, 1/3 of the Bosnian population has probably a citizenship or a passport of one of the EU countries. Half of Vojvodina has passports of Hungary, etc., etc. So in economic terms, basically, we just rely on Western Europe. That's gonna continue. But obviously, I mean, China and Russia, to be serious and to make a point, 20 years ago, Russia and China did not play any substantial role in the region. 20 years later, Russia is a major spoiler. Russia just has a goal to basically do its utmost to prevent both the EU from enlarging, but also NATO from expanding, and this is doing it quite efficiently through disinformation and using proxies. That's quite obvious. China is not that straightforward when it comes to political position. I mean, China supports the EU integration nominally, so basically China is not stopping basically this kind of a train which is not moving, but China has economic interests. It has, of course, strategic interests in the region, and it sends also messages. I mean, the last visit, just on the day when the Chinese embassy was destroyed by the Western bombs, was a message towards the European Union, and I think China is going to continue doing so. And that brings me just with one sentence to the growth plan of the European Union, which is going to be 6 billion for the entire Western Balkans. China overtook EU in Serbia in terms of direct foreign investments with corrosive capital last year. And I think if the EU just limits itself to this kind of a development through market-oriented integration or economic integration, China will always match what the EU puts on the table. So basically, this is a development dilemma. I think this brings us back to values and the political dimension of the EU enlargement, which we should not forget. Yes,
One example, not to interrupt you, but just to add to what you said. We did have one very positive example last year. The College of Europe opened a campus in Tirana. You know, so the first camp, and this is the institution where I did my master's degrees. And when I came back to Serbia, I dreamt about the College of Europe opening a campus in Serbia, in Belgrade. So I think this is a sign in the good really a step in the good direction, because the second campus which the college opened in 1992 or 1993 was in Warsaw, in Natolin. And now I think this symbolism is quite strong. So the EU can invest much more in universities, in education, also for younger students, not just postgraduates. So there is a huge opportunity there.
I mean, also to end up on a positive note, I think speaking about the tools that the EU has at disposal, just take small examples of elections. I mean, December 17th, or the fact that Dodik basically managed to win the presidency by rigging the election and stealing the votes. If you put here draw a red line and just communicate differently, you could basically allow those kind of energies that are not pro-Vučić and pro-Dodik when it comes to the majority of the population in Serbia, Republika Srpska, to come to the surface, basically. Diaspora was mentioned, just one positive sentence of this one. Bosnia has probably one of the biggest ratios per capita in terms of diaspora. It keeps producing diaspora, but at the same time, it could be in a kind of a positive turn, a huge opportunity for Bosnia and Herzegovina, not only in remittances, but also in terms of basically circular migration, bringing know-how, and basically creating a kind of a different country with all the experiences that you bring from Western Europe. And finally, because you mentioned, I think this is very important. Independently of whether we speak of Serbs, Bosniaks, Croats, Jews, Ukrainian minorities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the Western Balkans in general, I think there is a common sense or common perception of same problems that they are facing, and we spoke about environmental degradation, air pollution is horrible. During the corona pandemics, basically the ratio of people who died simply because of a lack of medical care was enormous. Basically, that unites them all. And there is an example precisely from Republika Srpska. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was in Belgrade discussing with activists fighting the mining projects, how they basically see the future of the Western Balkans. And there are huge mining projects for Ozren and for this kind of a whole Tuzla region, Majevica, Ozren, Tuzla, stretching towards Serbia basically. And this is about lithium, and there are Swiss companies behind it. And I met two people. I mean, one of them is a Bosniak, a Muslim from Bosnia and Herzegovina, working for an organization called Karton Revolucija. Unbelievably good guys, basically doing amazing social campaigning against corruption, against environmental degradation. And another one is a former fighter for the Republika Srpska army, a professional, a special unit. He fought between 1992 and 1995 against the Bosniaks. His name is Goran, and now he has merged forces with those guys from Karton Revolucija, and is the one standing basically on the brink of defending Majevica and Tuzla, and they have meetings, they go together, they fight together, and they just say, we're gonna stay here until the very last minute. And so I think this is this kind of appealing to the common sense that still prevails in a way in the region, which has a common past, and which I think has a common future too.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to spoil the discussion by actually combining what all of you said. I think it was very, very interesting. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you also very much for the interesting and necessary comments, which I think touched upon those issues which are very, very difficult to grasp, very difficult to handle, which were long-term. As you mentioned, reconciliation is one of the most important ones, and as you rightfully said, so it takes decades sometimes even, but nevertheless, it needs to start at one point, even though it doesn't have an end, which is visible today. Again, thank you. Thank you, the AIES, for the cooperation, and the IRP is still going to invite you for a glass of wine or a glass of water if you still want to hang around a little bit to join and maybe reflect upon some of the issues you think we didn't touch upon, but I think it was many, so thanks again to all of you. Have a nice evening. Good evening.